House Appropriations Subcommittee and the Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy will come to order. Clerk, if you could please take the roll.
Chair Cavett.
Here.
Representative Borton.
Here.
Representative Markinen.
Here.
Representative Steckloff. Representative Price.
Here.
Mr. Chair, a quorum of 4 subcommittee members is present.
Okay. Ask that Rep. Markinen approve the minutes. Being no objections, the minutes are approved. Okay. All right, fantastic. Today we have a presentation on Material Management Division, and we have with us Travis Bolschool, the Deputy Director of Eagle, and Tracy Kescametti, who is the acting director of the Materials Management Division. So thank you. If you'd like to come up, and when you're ready to start, we're ready to listen. Thanks for being here today.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us, Mr. Chair. Short and sweet from me here. Travis Bolschool, Deputy Director at the agency. I'm going to let Tracy walk you through the extensive programs that live under her authority these days. And I will ask you to go easy on her. She's probably got a month in the acting director role here, so we'll do our best.
Thanks for that setup, Travis. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Well, good afternoon. It's already officially afternoon. Thanks so much for having us. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to talk about our programs. Travis is going to work our slides for me. I could not resist this is just a gratuitous slideshow, set of pictures of our staff doing some neat things, right? That's our whole team and some folks out in the field doing good things. My goal today is to go high level on a number of topics. We're a division with a wide range of responsibilities, but I'm happy to take questions or during or after and give you more detail wherever your interests lie. Okay. So quick overview. I think Materials Management Division is probably the Eagle division that it is least obvious from our name what we do, right? We're not the air quality division, right? So think of the Materials Management Division in 3 buckets. This is core waste management regulatory programs is the first bucket. Okay, that's your hazardous waste, solid waste programs, and also under our amended solid waste law, our utilization facilities. Materials utilization, think of it as like recycling, right? That's recycling, that's compost. That's the newer facility types that are now regulated under Michigan solid waste law. So that's the first bucket, regulatory waste management programs. Second bucket, sustainability. This is largely recycling, energy. Most of this work is non-regulatory, technical assistance and grant making. The third bucket, and maybe a little bit surprising, is our radiological protection program. This is emergency preparedness, radiological materials, and an indoor radon program. Before we get into much detail about the programs, though, I do want to talk a little bit about our people. Materials Management Division is 154 full-time employees, lots of technical people, engineers, geologists, physicists, a range of scientists working on environmental monitoring and that sort of thing, but also inspectors going into facilities that are regulated, grant administrators providing, grant management and technical assistance to communities and small businesses, and a range of, managers and administrative folks. What's interesting in the pie chart, if you look at it, almost half of our staff are less than 5 years on the job. Okay? We see a lot more turnover in state government than we used to. Now, not all these people are fresh out of school, right? We get some young folks, but we're attracting a lot of really great people coming from the private sector, coming from consulting. So we're bringing in people that have a lot of really useful experience, but it does take an investment in these folks to get them up to speed. And that is reflected sometimes, right, in the permitting outcomes and some of the timelines that we're working under. Okay. So just a little overview on our budget. So in FY25, we're working on about a $47 million budget. FY24, that number was closer to $42 million. But of that FY24 number, only about half of that is our operating budget. We put half of that or more out the door in grants to communities and small businesses. The pie chart just shows you relatively our sources of funding. So our biggest chunk here is fees and other restricted funds. So this is your solid waste surcharge, this is disposal fees, these are fees from the public utilities that support the state energy program, right? And then the other big chunk there is the Renew Michigan Fund that supports our waste management and recycling programs. Good chunk there's federal funding. Most of that comes to support our hazardous waste program. And then we do have a little bit of general fund supplemental there on a couple of our programs. Any questions on the budget or anything like that before we go? Okay. All right, let's get into program stuff. So that first bucket, regulatory waste management programs. I'm going to probably talk more about our hazardous waste program than others, but again, one bucket, material waste management, 3 sub-programs I'm going to talk about. The first is hazardous waste. This is probably our biggest program. This is 50 people. This is more than about a third of our people and about a third of our budget. It's a federally delegated program. So this is part of that sort of landmark environmental legislation that came out of the 1970s, the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. It's delegated to the states. Most states are delegated to run this program. When you think about the hazardous waste program, the phrase you always hear is cradle to grave. Okay, so this is waste management requirements from when the waste is generated to when it's transported and to where it ultimately goes for treatment or disposal. Hazardous waste, I think a lot of us think of as like industrial waste, right? It comes out of manufacturing, it comes out of big factories, but it also is generated from environmental remediation, academic and medical facilities, right? And so there is a wide range of industry in Michigan that generates hazardous waste and requires infrastructure for safely managing that waste. We've got in Michigan over 20,000 facilities that generate hazardous waste. Most of those very small. We've got about 500 in our large category and about 2,000 in our middle small quantity generator category. So we have an awful lot of places that are generating hazardous waste. And then we have 14 active treatment disposal facilities in the state that serve those generators and out-of-state generators. Those 14 active facilities, 14 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's an incredibly resource-intensive operation to regulate them. This is licensing them requires engineering review, operational review, environmental monitoring. We inspect these places at least 4 times a year, at least quarterly. We're reviewing their operations, their financial assurance, their environmental monitoring. There's a lot of public engagement that goes around permitting a hazardous waste treatment, storage, and disposal facility. There's a lot of interest. That interest is growing, and the demand for, and rightfully so, right? The demand for that public engagement, for fulfilling FOIA requests, all of that is growing. And so there's a real intense amount of work that goes around just 14 facilities. The other thing I just want to say lastly on our hazardous waste program, it's a preventative program. Okay, the point of the hazardous waste program is to not have contaminated sites in Michigan, right? So it's about providing safe waste management options for, did we lose there? Oh, for these special kinds of wastes. Okay, so I'd be remiss in front of this group if I didn't talk a little bit about our funding and our budget. So this chart, and I hope you can see it all right, comes out of our hazardous waste user fee report that we do every other year. So the last 2 bars on the far right, actually, is it cut off, Travis? It's a little bit cut off, but that's okay. You'll get the point. Okay, you'll get the point. The last 2 bars are FY24 and 25, and they're on here as projected because we put this report together for FY23, but it's actually really close. But what I want you to notice, though, it really is just the trend. So the bottom, sort of that mid-color blue, and the aqua right above it, that combination there is program fees. That's disposal fees, user fees. So fees make up and support about half of the program, okay? It's roughly a $7 million program. Fees make up about half of that, okay? Those fees sunset this year, October 1st, okay? That next chunk, that white chunk, is federal funding. That's our EPA grant. The president's budget has a proposal to eliminate those categorical grants this year. And then that top one is actually another fee. That's a transporter fee. So I would put that in the bottom category as well. So a couple things I want to point out here. Overall, funding for the program has been trending down because that half of the pot that comes from user fees is dependent on waste volumes, right? Which is good, right? I mean, it's good to have the program pay for itself. And waste reduction is obviously the goal, right? But there is a risk in funding a program based on volume-related fees when the work is not always directly related to how much waste is managed, right? A big landfill requires a certain amount of oversight, whether or not the waste volumes fluctuate or not, right? You will notice in the governor's budget, we had a proposal for change here to increase our hazardous waste user fees. What we were asking for was essentially a doubling of fees that have not been revisited in many years. Some of these fees are very small. A generator of a certain volume pays $100 a year, right? Other generators pay $400 a year. These really large treatment disposal facilities, they do pay a sizable fee to renew their permit. That permit only renews every 10 years, and they can modify it during the time for no fee. And so we did have a structure that we proposed to update those fees that would generate about $5 million for the program, and also with an ask to add some bodies to the program to do that additional work. Okay, that's a lot on hazardous waste. Let's talk briefly about solid waste. Think of solid waste as the stuff that needs to be disposed of that isn't hazardous waste, right? This is household trash, but this is also scrap tires and medical waste and e-waste. You can go to the next slide, Travis. Okay, so I'm not going to go over this, but I think it's a super cool picture of a landfill. So if you guys want to know about how landfills work, we can talk about this all day, okay? But what I mostly want to convey with this is that a landfill is a complex engineered system, right? This is not an old gravel pit filled with garbage anymore, right? So these are highly engineered with a lot of technical oversight. So our staff oversee the design, construction, operation, closure, monitoring of these landfills. We have 67 solid waste landfills in the state. We inspect them at least quarterly, okay? And that's in addition to environmental monitoring and financial assurance reviews and that sort of thing. We do put together an annual report of solid waste disposed in Michigan for last year. There were 24 million tons of solid waste landfilled in Michigan. It's close to an 80-20 split of in-state waste and out-of-state waste. So about 80% of that waste is generated in Michigan. It's household trash, but it's also industrial waste that's not hazardous waste. Okay. And that the surcharge on that disposal is what largely funds our solid waste program. That surcharge is 36 cents a ton right now. Generates about $6 million a year for that program. So like I said, we've historically focused on disposal, right? Our solid waste program was all about regulating the landfills and making sure that we had enough of them, right? Because in the 90s, we were running out of landfill space. Communities didn't want to site landfills. So we went through a solid waste planning process where we said, okay, everybody has to figure out where their waste is going to go and make sure that they have capacity. We did a really good job and sort of overplanned. We have a lot of landfill capacity in Michigan. No worries of running out of landfill capacity in Michigan. But what we want to focus on now, right, is getting away from that disposal model and going more to a utilization model, right? Because there's a lot of value in the materials that are landfilled every year, right? And so with the Part 115 amendments in 2022, we now have a regulatory framework around promoting and growing our recycling sector, right, to really recover the value of those materials and reduce our dependency on landfills. And that is really sort of changing the work that we do, right? We've been really focused on those landfills, and now we've got new staff focused on new kinds of places. So when we talk about utilization, again, this is recycling, composting, anaerobic digesters. It's just as much regulation as it is technical assistance and grant making, right? So we really have a new sector to grow here. No, you're okay. So, okay, let's move into the second bucket. First bucket, core waste management, regulatory programs. Second bucket, sustainability. These are largely not regulatory programs, okay? So these are recycling and materials management planning, pollution prevention, and our energy programs. All right. Materials management planning is how we're going to make this transition from a disposal model to a utilization model. We've asked all the counties are required to update their plans and have what's now called a materials management plan. There's an opportunity for them to work together collaboratively and do this as regional planning. That's what we're showing on the map. Largely the bigger counties are going to do this on their own. That's what you'll see. The counties that are in white are the counties that are doing single county plans. It doesn't show as well. Across the UP, there's 3 shades of blue. We have 3 regions across the UP. 4 regions across northern Michigan, but we've got about half of our counties working together collaboratively on this. And the whole point of materials management planning is to set some goals for, increasing our recycling right, access. We have an overall state goal of hitting 30% recycling by 2029. And so the counties are asked to look at where they are now, set some goals, and figure out how to get there. And this is a funded effort, right? Each county gets $60,000 a year, plus an increase factor for population, plus an increase factor if they're working together collaboratively. And what they don't use on planning, they can use to implement programs. So if that's increasing access, bringing collection to the communities, establishing drop-off facilities, whatever it is that they need. Okay, everyone loves these guys. These are our recycling raccoons. So our recycling program is largely three pieces. It's grants, technical assistance, and measurement and data. So our staff do a lot of data collection and data analysis, and they provide that information to the counties for their materials management planning. It's also a statewide education campaign. Hopefully you've seen these guys on billboards, at stadiums, that sort of thing, right? The idea was, instead of me having one set of rules in the community that I live in and you having another set of rules and not knowing what you can put in your bin, right? Statewide education for some consistency so we can grow this sector. Yeah. So this just shows our steady progress on increasing recycling. For 24, we were at 25%, and we're looking at our municipal waste stream here, right? We're not counting concrete and scrap metal and things that have historically been recycled at really high rates. This is your curbside recycling. Our goal is to get to 30% by 2029. I think that's really achievable. A lot of this variability you see here is we didn't have really good data in the beginning because no one was required to tell us what to do because the whole recycling space was unregulated, right? And so a big piece of the regulatory framework around recycling, it's not about regulating how these places are operating or mandating recycling. It's a reporting piece so that we know what's going on in there, and we know where to strategically invest our grant dollars to provide more access to people. The other part of the recycling program, right, you can collect recyclables all you want, but there's got to be a market for them, right? There's got to be demand. So we have this program called Next Cycle Michigan. We have about $2 million in programming through Next Cycle, and it's really to foster recycled material markets. And so this is they call it an incubator, which is kind of like a buzzword, right? But it's bringing project teams together in a really sort of intensive program to give them mentoring and connections and making private and public money available to them once they go through these programs. And so Next Cycle is about supporting recycled material markets. Okay. We're still in our second bucket. Remember, waste management, sustainability. Now in sustainability, we did recycling. Now we're on pollution prevention. Pollution prevention is all about waste reduction. Historically, we did a lot of work here around industrial waste, right? Reducing the types of hazardous waste that are being created, that sort of thing. Our focus right now in pollution prevention is food waste. Okay, so we have a lot of room to make a lot of progress here. And our goal is to reduce our food waste in Michigan by 50%. And we can do that at the production side, right? But we can also do it through food rescue and food diversion. And then our last choice would be, composting and anaerobic digestion, something like that. Really interesting, we've got one community in Michigan, in Southfield, Michigan, in Oakland County, that has adopted a zero food waste roadmap, right? And the goal is, if Southfield, a city of that size, can go to zero food waste, we don't need everybody else to go down by 50% because there's so much progress to be made in such a large community, right? So this is early days in this world, but we can do a lot of work in diverting organics from landfills. It makes sense because there's value in that material. It also prolongs landfill space, reduces odors at landfills, it reduces gas generation at landfills. There's just a better way to manage that waste than to put it in a landfill. All right, the last bucket in our sustainability tier is our energy programs. Okay, so the energy programs are primarily funded through Federal Department of Energy grants and also a user fee on our public utilities. There were also some one-time funds appropriated last year for the Michigan Home Energy Rebate Program and the Renewable Readies Community. That was not included in the budget number I gave you, right? That was a one-time grant to do some really big projects around energy efficiency. But the goal of these programs really, it's energy efficiency, it's grid resiliency, It's providing technical assistance to communities so that they can make informed decisions about their energy needs and their energy options, and really giving them the opportunity to sort of diversify their energy supply. Okay, last bucket, radiological protection, okay? This one sometimes surprises people, like Eagle does what with nuclear, right? But the three buckets here are emergency preparedness, radiological protection, and indoor radon. Emergency preparedness has most to do with the nuclear power plants, right? We have 3 nuclear power plants in Michigan right now. 2 are online. One went down and it's coming back up, right? Eagle does not license a nuclear power plant. We don't have that authority. That all still lies at the federal government, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but we do have a role in supporting the federal government in emergency preparedness. All of these rules around emergency preparedness came out of the 3 Mile Isle incident in the 80s, right? And so FEMA and the Department of Energy and the NRC all mandate all of this emergency preparedness work. This is drills and exercises where the plants have to work with state police and Eagle and the county emergency managers to simulate an emergency and act out what we would do. And so our staff they have a role in the emergency preparedness piece in decontamination and monitoring and that sort of thing. The other thing we do in this world is monitor the environment around a nuclear power plant just on an everyday operations basis, right? This doesn't have to do with, this is like setting a baseline so that we always know what's going on in the environment around these plants. We have data from before they started operating. We monitor the water. We also monitor milk from local dairy farms around the plants so that we have decades of baseline data just on ambient environmental data around the power plants. Radioactive materials is the part of this program that's getting the most attention these days. Again, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission regulates most things nuclear waste and radiological material, right? So any kind of waste coming out of a power plant that's considered high-level radioactive waste, we don't have a hand in that. There's a middle category, low-level radioactive waste. We don't have a hand in that. That's all waste coming out of power plants, like source material, spent nuclear fuel, things like that. We do not regulate that. But there's 2 other categories that the federal government has said it's not worth it for them to regulate. The first is T-norm. So this is your vocab word for the day. Okay, T-norm stands for technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radiological material. Okay, so focus on the naturally occurring part, the norm, okay? Naturally occurring radiological material. That means that down in the geology of the earth, right, in the rock and the dirt and the soil, that stuff is naturally radioactive. Okay, that's why you have a radon risk in your house, right? So there's naturally occurring radioactivity down in the ground. This isn't from contamination, this is just from how the earth was built, okay? The technically enhanced part is when a person, or people as society, we do something to bring that radioactivity up to the surface. So a lot of waste in the T-norm world comes from oil and gas exploration, right? We're pumping, gas and brine and that sort of thing up and down from the earth, and all of that passed through that natural geology picks up the radioactivity, and when it goes through the pipelines, it deposits a scale, like a little, like a sediment, and that sediment is radioactive. Okay, but not to a level that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission thinks it's worth regulating, right? You can't make energy out of it, you can't make weapons out of it. It's a low level, not regulated at the federal level, but it is radioactive and it does need to be managed properly, to protect public health. So that's the first category, that's T-norm, okay? It comes from oil and gas. It also comes from water treatment. Like if you live in a community where there's a municipal well and they pump water up out of the ground and they filter it through a water plant, the sediment that they filter out can be radioactive. And those kinds of operations, oil and gas industry and the water treatment industry, they need a safe place to dispose of and manage this. And so we have regulations for the disposal of T-norm. These are state rules. And they specify, levels of radioactivity below which this material can go into a regular landfill. Or there's a second tier where the material would have to go into our hazardous waste landfill. The other part of our radiological program is we've got these physicists that are really, really well versed in all of this, and sometimes people just come across radioactive stuff that they don't know what to do with, right? So at a scrapyard, there's portal monitors. and they go off a few times a year. And it turns out that some kind of weird gauge came into a scrapyard with a load of metal, and our guys help figure out, if there's a risk associated with that and get that gauge back to where it's going. We have a resident last year that showed up with some radioactive fossils. We were calling them the radioactive dinosaur bones, right? We've got these guys with all of this equipment. They can assess the hazard and help those people understand, what they can do to manage that stuff. So I think of that as like helping people get rid of unwanted radioactive waste, right? But it's the stuff that the federal government thinks is at a low level enough to not regulate because you can't make energy or weapons out of it, right? So that's our radiological materials program, and the last part of it is indoor radon. So hopefully you guys have all heard our statewide education campaign on indoor radon. Radon is this is naturally occurring. Remember your vocab word. Technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radioactive material. Again, it's the naturally occurring part, right? And depending on the geology of where you live, there might be more or less radon that could get into your house, right? Depends on what kind of rocks and soil surround your house. Radon's a naturally occurring gas, but it's also the leading cause of lung cancer in non-smokers, right? And so it can find its way into your house through your sump pump and your trench drains, your foundation drains, through cracks in your foundation. And so our program, this is funded through an EPA grant and a little bit of general fund. We provide radon test kits to the counties to then provide out to their residents. We do a lot of outreach. We partner with the Michigan Broadcast Association. They do the outreach campaign on the radio. And we've also got a mitigation pilot program going right now because we've been helping people for years test their home for radon, and we can help them understand what their risk is, and then we can say, okay, well, above this level, you need a radon mitigation system. And that costs about $2,000, and sometimes that's out of the reach of some homeowners. So we're running a pilot program right now to provide assistance for mitigation systems for low-income households. The pilot is running in the Western UP right now. We've got $50,000 set aside to run that pilot. We're going to see how that goes and hopefully expand that statewide in future years if we've got the resources. So that's like crash course on a wide range of programs for Materials Management Division. Takeaway, I want you guys to take away is, wide range of things in those three buckets: waste management, sustainability, radiological protection, largely all preventative programs. I'm going to turn it back to Travis. He's got some thoughts for you guys, and then happy to take questions.
And I won't linger long here because I don't think any of these should be surprises to any of you at this point, whether it's been in our meetings or in committee hearings. We've touched on each of these. So executive budget has the tipping fee proposal. Again, just high level, what are we trying to do there? Some deterrence to out-of-state waste, raise funding for that contaminated site issue that we talked about, must have been a couple months ago now. And then also focus on continuing to modernize our waste and materials management processes in the state. I'll touch on the second one for a moment here. So you all in the House now have the Senate supplemental that they sent over. It did appropriate the funding for the Renewables Ready Community Program under CPRG. Again, that is a $129 million fully federal grant with no state match required that we were awarded last September. The state pilot of that is now, has now obligated, around 25 of $30 million. And that's money that is hitting communities around the state. If they choose, again, this has nothing to do with the regulatory things around power generation. If they choose to site renewables or battery storage, that program provides grant dollars for public safety projects. So that's been hitting the ground as whether it's buying a new fire truck, it is paving roads, parks, helping township buildings get rehabilitated, those types of things. So wanted to highlight that continued opportunity. And then the last one I'll mention, the exec budget recommendation also includes a pretty modest request for 2 FTEs for the energy programs. You heard Tracy touch on the $210 million home energy rebate program. There was this $30 million pilot that we've been doing. There's been a lot of federal funds that have flown through this agency. And to date, that's primarily been done with existing resources and some term limited folks that we bring on where we can to surge. So the exec budget requests a couple extra folks to keep managing some of these funds that we know, despite the time limited nature of them coming in, programs are going to be spending 4, 5, sometimes 10 years into the future. So making sure that we can continue to deliver that service. So that wraps up what we have for you there. And with that, be happy to take some questions.
All right, thank you both. Appreciate that. I've got a couple questions on the unreturned deposit containers and the revenues that you receive from that. I think it's probably fair to say a windfall even of cash that's coming into the department. Is it fair to say that the department receives more revenue when the deposit law fails to produce higher redemption rates?
Yes.
Okay. I believe you received approximately $80 million due on a 73% redemption rate. Can you provide us, maybe not at the moment, or maybe if you know a couple off the head, provide us with a breakdown on how those funds were allocated and spent?
Yeah, so maybe what I'll do here in the moment is give you a sense of where the initiated law directs those funds, and then give you a sense of what that looks like in terms of spending, right? So again, for everybody in the room, voter-initiated law, it directs 75% of the unclaimed bottle deposits to Eagle as an agency. That's what the voters put into the statute, right? If you all want to change that, 75% voted the legislature to do so. What that looks like, of that 75%, 80% flows into what's called the Cleanup and Redevelopment Fund. So when I came in here with Mike Neller about 2 months ago, and we talked about the over $300 million that we have specifically allocated to contaminated sites around the state, that's that money right there, right? So you all actually have a legislative report that we send over quarterly that tells you where we're spending contaminated site dollars. I'd be happy to send that over to the committee. And it tells you the source of those funds, right? So if you look at that legislative report, you will see many instances of a site funded with cleanup and redevelopment fund dollars. There's 2 other categories from that funding. 10% goes into the Community Pollution Prevention Fund. We can barely touch that money. I'll give you why I say barely. Again, statute says we can spend the interest earned on the fund. So that means there's a principal growing that we have no ability to touch, right? So that gets granted out for pollution prevention grants. We end up running those every couple of years. Food waste has been a recent focus of those funds. Last category, last 10%, it's the Cleanup and Redevelopment Trust Fund. We absolutely cannot touch that money. It says once it hits, again, statute says, once it hits a balance of $200 million in the Cleanup and Redevelopment Trust Fund, again, we can spend the interest earned on contaminated site work. So, you know, if you figure of that $80 million, you say 10% of that, you call it $10 million a year, we're probably still realistically, if we assume current numbers, still 15 years away from being able to spend that money. So yes, absolutely, Representative, it has been tremendously helpful in the change that we've been able to make in what we're doing on contaminated sites around the state. That's why we've gone from addressing 250 a year to already touching 800 so far this year, and we're just, you know, what, 3/4 the way through the year. So.
All right, thank you very much. Rep. Borton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for being here today. Thank you for taking complicated issues and putting them into layman's terms for us. Mine's also going to be along the lines of the bottle return. I just had a question on the Take 'em Back campaign. I believe Eagle spent $1 million on that campaign, yet the redemption has declined. I heard like 3%. Do you guys evaluate internally why you think that might be the case?
So I'll start with answering a couple of parts there, Representative. Appreciate the question. So the Take 'em Back campaign, right, was a legislatively directed spending, right? That was very clear in statute. A campaign to do X with this $1 million directed to this organization, right? So we certainly executed that legislative intent. We did that. One of the tricky things about the bottle bill, and I know there's folks in the room who know the bottle bill way better than me, so I urge you to talk to them a little bit. Nobody's necessarily, no department is assigned in there with executing the bottle bill, right? So if if you look at most of the statutes, take like NREPA, right, Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act, one of the first things you see in that statute is a definition of department, and you don't necessarily see that in the bottle bill. So I wouldn't say that Eagle is sitting here year after year looking at the bottle bill. Why is it successful? Is it not? I don't think we're tasked with that in statute, and I think we certainly try to keep our core focus on the things that we are tasked with in statute. Now, that being said, there's a few ideas out there, and I think most folks who tell you what they think is happening are going to be, some assumption, some speculation in that, and I'm going to do a little bit of that here and just give you that caveat on the front end. We've made a huge effort in Michigan over the past 10 years to make sure folks have convenient access to recycling. I will admit, I put my containers in my single stream recycling bin in my garage, and it's a hassle thing. I also frankly don't go through a lot of deposit containers, and we have certainly seen the recycling rate go up during a similar timeline. COVID did something, right? We saw a redemption rate, I want to say it was probably in the high 80%, close to 90% prior to COVID. After COVID, we've been down in the mid to low 70s. So that made a big difference. There's clearly been a change in consumer behavior. What exactly that looks like, I can't say for 100% certain.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Rep. Price.
Thank you. A few questions. A couple about funding, and thank you for reminding us about those renewable ready resources that are there and appropriated and assigned, that we just need to get an appropriations bill so we can start spending them. That's obviously an important part of what we can do for our communities. I also wanted to go back to that hazardous waste program funding and the amount that's currently EPA. You mentioned that funding is at risk. Could you talk a little bit more about if that EPA funding goes away and if we don't follow the exec rec of increasing the fees, what will happen to this program?
Sure, I appreciate that, Rep. Price, thank you. So like I mentioned, the funding for this program is combined from about 50% paid for by fees and a little less than 50% paid for by our EPA grant. That EPA grant has been going down every year along with the fees going down. There's not been, what Travis has a good word for, what it's CPI, inflation adjustment right on that. But our staff costs go up, right? Our staff get a cost of living increase and that sort of thing. So we've been balancing that. The Renew Michigan pot does help defray some of that around the edges. If the EPA grant it does not come through next year, right? That's about $2.5 million a year. We won't be able to make payroll, right? So we've got about 50 people paid for, in our hazardous waste program, and similarly with the fees, right? I mean, that those two things combined, I mean, we would not be able to meet our required activities as a federally delegated program, right? And so for Michigan to continue to be federally delegated to run that program, and I'll just tell you, we do this a lot better than EPA does it, okay? And they don't want to take these programs back, right? Like, we want Michigan, state of Michigan employees going into our local businesses and helping them with these compliance issues. We don't want EPA coming in and doing this. So it's really important that we run this program out of Michigan. So it has to be funded somehow, right? So both of those two pots of money have to be thought about, and to think about how do we want to fund this? Whether we grow it or not is another question. But even just to stay whole, we have to do something this year.
Just one piece I'll add on to that. One of the goals with the proposed increase in hazardous waste is to increase what we do from an inspection perspective, right? So Tracy told you about the large, like the TSDs, the treatment, storage, and disposal facilities, the landfills, the big treaters, we're getting in there quarterly. What she didn't say is the very small quantity generators, I'm probably missing that term just slightly, we're getting in once every 16 years, give or take.
Yeah. Okay. Let me say, Travis. Okay. So we've got 3 categories. We have large quantity generators, small quantity generators, very small. Okay. 500 large, 2,500 small, 20,000 very small. Okay. EPA requires us to get to the larges only once every 5 years. Okay. The small facilities are the ones we try to get to every 10 years. We have no EPA requirement under our grant to do that, but we recognize that we need to do that. And the very smalls, we get to on a complaint basis. Okay, the thing, and I didn't mean to steal your thunder, but here, I'll tell the story. Here, the thing I want to highlight about this, right? The EPA says, manage this program, and here's the guardrails, right? They want us to focus on those large quantity generators. But what we know about Michigan manufacturing is it's really sophisticated. And most of those operations have really good environmental health and safety staff. So even though they're generating the largest volumes, we don't believe that's really where the risk is, right? It's those small quantity generators that we only get to every 7 to 10 years, that even though they're generating smaller volumes, there's more of them, and they're much less sophisticated operations. So if you remember a plating shop in Oakland County that caused an awful lot of trouble and drama on 696 about 5 years ago, that was a small quantity generator. Right, I remember that very well. It was a small quantity generator, because for those sorts of operations, getting rid of your waste is an expense, right? And it's not always the first thing they do, right? They make payroll before they get rid of their hazardous waste, right? And so those sorts of operations are really where we need to put more effort. And so when we put together that proposal for change and we said, hey, let's increase these user fees so we can improve program outcomes, right? We can do more inspections, we can evaluate more contaminated sites, we can improve permitting outcomes. The goal there was to grow the program, okay? But at the very least, what we're talking about this year is maintaining the program. Thanks, Travis. Sorry.
Rep Markkinen.
Hey, thank you for being here today. You mentioned a pilot program in the Western UP. Is that being run out of the Marquette office?
It's actually being run out of our central office. So we do have district offices, and that's most of our regulatory staff, right, that are doing the inspections. All of our radiological staff are here in Lansing. So we have one radon specialist he's paid for with our EPA grant.
Just one?
Yeah, we just have one. But he's doing a lot of work in the UP. So one of the things we recognized a couple of years ago was that we didn't have any credentialed mitigation contractors in the Upper Peninsula. There was nobody to install these systems. So we could do all the outreach we wanted. There was nobody to come back behind us and build those mitigation systems. So we did some outreach, mostly to the HVAC community, right? Because it's a really nice alignment and skill set, right? And really supplements the work that those trades can do. So we did we brought in an organization from out of state that trains people and gets them credentialed in radon mitigation. And we provided that. We got a few new contractors up in the UP, and so now doing this pilot program is kind of a nice add-on. Yeah. So now we've got the folks to do the work. Let's get them in some homes. But yeah, that's done out of our Lansing office with our one radon specialist.
Yeah, I don't imagine they're a dime a dozen.
They're not. And it's actually a fairly simple system, right? I mean, if anyone has it, it's basically a ventilation system for the air underneath your basement. But you got to be quite a DIY guy to do it yourself.
Well, we have some HVAC programs in two of our fine community colleges in the UP that might like to take that on as a little specialty.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Rep. Rep Price.
Sorry, Steckloff. You're going to miss my shout out for Southfield, too. But Rep. Steckloff and I both represent parts of Southfield. And I wanted to thank you for bringing up that Make Food Not Waste blueprint to zero food waste in Southfield. They have come to our community conversations and shared some of the work that they're doing. And we feel really lucky to have them working in our area. Just, for other folks on the committee, Southfield has 34,000 households, about 76,000 residents. It's the 17th most populous city in our state. There's $3.8 million of food that's wasted every year. And Southfield also has food insecurity as a major issue, right? 9% of people living in Southfield are experiencing food insecurity. With $4.4 million in unmet meals. So when they came to our community conversation and talked about some of the work they're doing, some of it is, making composting very inexpensive and easy and convenient. But one thing I was surprised by is just some really basic education and some really low-cost tools in terms of tape that you can label your food, eat within a week or move this to the front, to just kind of have a more community or household conversation about not wasting food and the incredible amount of food that just putting into implementation within your house some basic, inexpensive practices. I'm thrilled by the work that they're doing. I'm wondering what the plan is next for the rest of the state, right? This is only in one of my 7 communities. I think Stuckloff also represents about 7 or 8 communities. When and how will we see this sort of program expand to other parts of the state that are struggling with generating food waste and experiencing food insecurity?
I appreciate the question. Thank you. So Travis mentioned that we fund our pollution prevention programs out of that Community Pollution Prevention Fund that comes from the return bottle deposits. We have allocated $250,000 a year to do that pollution prevention work. So we're programming those dollars right now towards food waste because we know there's such an opportunity here. And you're exactly right. We're composting and anaerobic digestion, last option, right? We want to rescue that food, right? We want to reduce the food waste at the front end, right? We want to feed people, feed animals, and then divert it, right? But in addition to that pollution prevention money, we are programming some of our Renew Michigan money toward food waste. We've brought on a food waste. We've got 2 folks working on this. One is focused on food waste, but on the waste reduction prevention side, right? So we've got one person providing technical assistance to those communities, and then we've got another person focused on composting and aerobic digestion, right? So it's really those 2 halves. So we do have one person in-house. We're programming some of the Renew Michigan dollars towards organics recycling, but there's nothing but potential in this area, right? And I'm hoping that through our materials management planning, that's something that gets through, and we're providing a lot of technical assistance through that process as well. But we're hoping that that's something communities will work on through their materials management plan. They'll recognize the need and the opportunity, and then they'll start putting those pieces together, right? How do they get the collection? How do they get, the processing, or how do they bring in the programs on the waste reduction side? So there is a lot of opportunity here. It folds in really well with my Healthy Climate Plan goals for, food waste reduction, reducing food waste in landfills, right? So happy to talk to you more about how other communities can pick that up, but Southfield has been a great partner to start this. And like I said, if we get one big community to go 0 food waste, it really does lighten the load on everyone else. But it sets a great model too, that if a community of that size with that wide range of housing stock and demographics can pull it off, a smaller community can do it as well.
Thank you. Rob? Okay. Real quick on tipping fees. What percentage of our trash comes from out of state? And with increasing the tipping fees, how much would that reduce that amount by?
So I'll take the first part. Maybe you can take the second part. So about 20% of the waste that's landfilled in Michigan comes from out of state. So last year it was 24 million tons of waste went into landfills, and of that about 20% came from out of state. The top of that list is always Canada, followed by Ohio.
And no certainty on how much it would reduce out of state trash, right? I think it's a economics equation where you start to look at truck travel, the additional cost. It's also an opportunity, right, to help out of state actors pay for a quarter of, the contaminated site work that we have to clean up in the state too.
All right. Thank you very much. Any questions? All right. Much appreciated. Thanks for showing up today and answering those questions.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about our programs. Thanks for having us.
You bet. Thank you. All right. We have no absent members, so there being no further business before this, the meeting is adjourned.